Okay, this stretcher is my lynx and wolverine stretcher both. And what I've learned how to do is to drill like a 1/4 inch hole about 3/4 of an inch deep on both sides, and then have different lengths of pins. The shorter pin is when I'm stretching a lynx, and the longer pin when I'm stretching a wolverine, and all it does is it just makes a greater gap between the boards, and it's just the right size for a wolverine now. Okay, now we're going to board the wolverine now that we've got it fur in. Let's get them on nice and straight. You can see it's even hard to do this when it's wet. You can imagine if it gets over dry, it makes it impossible to get these feet turned around. If that happens to you, if they dry out before you get a chance to turn them, just leave them fur in. They'll tan that way just fine. Oops. Now, you don't have to have the feet exactly like the way I do it here. It just seems to me that if I have the foot on the side of the board, I just have more room to put all the other parts of the leather I want to stretch. Everybody does this part different. Okay, now that we got this part, we can stretch it. Here's my nail. Looks like I can get all the way to the last hole on this one, the big wolverine. Okay, we'll use a Martin stretcher this time for a tailboard. And this, rather than using a string, we'll just use push pins. Okay, that looks pretty good. That's plenty good enough there. Now we'll do the front legs. Looks great. The legs are done. Get a couple of push pins in the lower jaw here to hold it in place. Just like that. You notice that this lips were very dry on this Wolverine, but they're split pretty good. Just leave them like this, and the fact that we're going to freeze dry it, they'll stay exactly like that, frozen while it's drying. Okay, this wolf has been drying for about a week, frozen. And we brought it in a few hours ago, and you can see this part here is dry and ready to be turned. Behind the ears were down like this while it was drying out there, frozen in position. So this part here didn't dry. Okay, so what I'm going to do there, first thing is I'm just going to take a little of this aluminum sulfate, or alum, and just put a little of this on the ear and just rub it in here a little bit. Okay, the aluminum sulfate will absorb the water and dry this very rapidly, even without much air on it. Now we're going to go and pull the push pins out so we can take them off the stretcher. It's good to give them a little twist so we don't pull the points off. Get the last push pin out. Okay, the tail is still a little wet, so I'm going to leave it tied to this marten stretcher, and we'll just leave it on there while we have it fur out, drying indoors. Okay, the legs are dry, but underneath the foot here at the heel pad is still a little wet, so we'll hit that with the alum also. But I'll go ahead and get these pins out of here now. Okay, right here, you can see how wet that is. The rest of the foot is nice and dry. If we waited for this to dry, the whole foot would be so dry we'd never be able to turn it. So we'll just take a little bit of this alum and crunch it in place here. It's supposed to be powder, but it gets dried out like that. And that'll dry that foot up just beautiful. Same here. It's easier to do it now. Sometimes too, right down in the toes, like after we get it turned around, if it's not drying good right down at the claw joint, you can pack a little alum in there too, and that'll help that dry out real good. Okay, we can go ahead and turn these now. There we go. Okay. Pull the nail out, relax the tension on the stretcher. Now we'll pull this right off the stretcher. I'm going to leave that tail attached to my marten stretcher. Stuff the feet through first here. Okay, this is still a little bit wet too, and we're going to, after we get it turned around, I'm going to go ahead and rub some alum in this too. But again, this part is pretty dry, and if I wait too long, I'll never get it turned. Okay, now the ears. All I'm going to do is just push those out from underneath. I can feel that alum already starting to dry them. And again, we'll have a nice little pocket here if we can dump a little of that powdered alum in it. Make sure we don't have any problems with any hair slippage. On this too, if you wait too long and the ears are completely dry on both sides and hard, you can leave them inside. The fur buyer won't like it. He'd prefer to see the ears sticking out so he knows that they're there and there's no hair slip. But it's better than trying to wet the ear and try to soften it again. Every time you wet the fur and the leather, you take a chance of bacteria getting in there and starting to cause hair slip. Okay, just make sure she's on the stretcher nice and straight. A couple of push pins and we'll nail the back feet down. All we need now is just a couple of push pins just to hold it. Okay. Again, just look at it to make sure it's straight on the stretcher. This is already attached. We really don't need anything down here. It's better to leave the air at that and feel for any wet spots. And if you find any wet spots at all, just get the alum out again. It's never a bad idea to, on these hind legs and the front legs, is just pour a little alum in there. Just get it down, packed into each toe, so the claw joint will dry out real nice. Okay, we'll flip them over again here. This was still a little wet here. Okay, this is all dry enough here, but you just check along the edges. If you see any wet spots anywhere, just rub a little alum on it. That'll take care of that. A lot of times right in here at the armpits is a typical place that it gets folded and hidden from the air. Good. As soon as we turn the wolf, the fur is a little bit damp and it's, the fur is matted together. This is the best time to do your grooming. And all I'm going to do is just spray a little mist of water on it. Not to get it wet, but just to get it slightly damp. And use like a dog brush or what's called a carding brush. And just brush down the fur a little bit. Just like when you wash your own hair, if you get it straightened out now and it dries in a nice straight, smooth position, it'll tend to stay that way. Good. We're done. All we have to do is lean it up against the wall and let it finish drying indoors now.
This is about a large-sized beaver. Not a big one, but he's kind of thin. He ain't as fat as you usually are. He'd be a lot bigger if he was fatter, but it's a nice beaver. And I was going to tell a little bit about skinning him. A lot of people skin him on a flat table, and it could be done, but I like to do it in a V-shaped thing here to hold them so they won't roll. And as you skin it, you can tip them and they'll stay, see? And it's easier to get the skin off. This here is a buck knife. It's just a regular knife. It ain't the muskrat one, but it's got a sharp blade on one side and a rounded blade on the other. I use this mostly for my own skinning. It stays sharp. It's got a good blade in it and everything, and it's handy for cutting the feet off and do the splitting. It's very important to have a good knife, and here's one that I've had for a long time, and you can see it's a hollow blade, steel, and it's what I use after I get an edge on it. Then I got a leather strap, and I just strap it a little bit as I go along every time it dulls a little bit, but it holds the edge pretty good. And you need a scraper. I call it a scraper, a flusher, or whatever it is. But I've had this little tool since about the mid-40s. It was probably one of the first pieces of plastic I seen. There was no plastic in them days. And it was a file, an 8-inch file. File wore out, so I took the file out, heated up and pounded it out and made a flush scraper out of it, or a flusher. I've had it ever since. I've skinned many a beaver with this. First thing you do is cut the feet off. Grab it right there, take a knife and cut this right here. They're supposed they're not as big as the other ones. So now we'll start the actual skinning. We'll start from the head. First you split them open here. Probably about straight across from the two arms there where the fat starts in there. This is a little difficult here because there's no fat up around the mouth and stuff, so. I never worry about doing a good job around the lips because when you stretch it, this all comes off. You trim that off, see? So I'm going to go around the other side there and do a little bit here. Cut this a little bit deeper here. See, there's where the fat starts, right there. There ain't too much on this one, but there is some. Okay. Then I'll take the scraper and start doing this to it. By doing this with a scraper here, it makes it a lot easier to skin the belly part. It's usually just fat and it comes off pretty easy. And about every 6 inches or so, then you take the knife and Slid the hide open. It gives you easier access to this. See, when they're skinny, they're kind of hard to clean. Takes a little more work, but when they're nice and fat, this usually comes off pretty easy. See, there ain't too much fat on that beaver. If he was nice and fat, he'd be easier to skin. Well, it's coming off pretty good. Yeah, doing this here, scraping this off here, you don't have to see what you're doing under there. You just keep peeling it off and go all the way across there, see. It's not gonna... One thing you want to remember is not to get this sharp enough to cut yourself, see. You notice it's got little teeth in there. It kind of digs the fat off of there. But you never want to get this really sharp, and you want to make sure that the ends are not sharp, because when you're doing that and you turn a little bit, it'll cut a hole in there. You see how they're kind of rounded. And if you left any piece of fat when you get it all open, then you can come back and do that to it, see. But some of the beavers will have, especially around the shoulders and maybe a little bit around the legs, would have some old scars and stuff that not really healed up. And see, there's one right there. And sometime, if it's not totally healed up, your scraper would punch a hole through there, or it would open it up. Nothing you can do about that. But you want to remember not to cut any holes in there, because these fur buyers, they dock you $15, I think it is, for having a knife, a hole in it. So I'm always careful to try not and cut the hide. You can put a lot of pressure on this scraper, because beaver have pretty thick hides. As long as this scraper is made right, it doesn't do that. You're pretty safe of just peeling the hide off. Okay. I'll make another slot here. It's pretty easy to make a straight cut about every 6 inches, because you can put your knife up through, and when you pull it, it comes right even to the other cut, so no problem there. See, all of this here you can push off with the scraper. Makes less that you have to skin with a knife, and it does a good job by taking all the fat off. Now I'm going to make a little cut along here. You never want to cut this too deep, like I mentioned before, because the blood is always settled down here in the lower end from hanging. You can tell by just barely cutting through the skin. There's some pretty big blood veins right down in there. If you cut one of them, then you got a mess of blood running all over. It's always good to keep the blood cleaned up around here because it gets all over on the fur, and so you can avoid that by keeping an eye on it and wipe it as it runs on. Finish this part out here. I always try and use the scraper on whatever part I could scrape the hide off. It makes it easier. See, when I'm skinning here with the knife, I use my finger as a guide back there, see? And kind of run your blade along the hide. Instead of doing this, see, you have a tendency of cutting a hole in the skin. But by just running the blade over your finger in the back there, does a pretty good job. There's there's the ear right there, and you have to be kind of careful so you don't cut the hide on the outside. There's always a little bone right there. You can feel it as you see it's right there. You get right in behind that and cut a deep cut there, like that. And that kind of lets the hide come out a little bit there, and it's easy to skin around the ear. See, all the time I got my finger right where I'm skinning, and I can feel the blade, and some of these places a little difficult here. Once you get away from the ear, then it kind of stretches out again, see. Now we'll go to the eye. And it's important to skin the eye out good too. I don't know why they don't use the head or anything when they tan them up and use them for garments, but they still don't like to see a knife mark in it. And I'm going to use another knife here. Just use it for a little bit. It's a stainless steel hollow blade, and it's a pretty good knife. But a lot of people like a big wide blade and a long curve to it, see. a blade with a short curve has a tendency to cut in right there as you go along, see? A short curved blade would have a tendency to nick the hide as you going along there. See, this knife is really sharp. I put it on a leather strap just before I brought it up here. Having good light is important. I did all of my beaver skinning with a little Coleman lantern, a lot of times just a kerosene lamp. And I never have time during the day to skin a beaver because I'm out trying to get another one. So I skin them at night. And then when you're skinning, you want to kind of make maybe a ½ inch or an inch cut all the way along. You don't want to go in too deep in one place because it leaves little edges on the side there that you can cut the hide. So you want to try and keep it pretty smooth. It's taking about a ½ inch at a time, see. Getting along the back here is real easy because you run your finger there and you can make long strokes. But when you come down in little curves like this, you have to be careful so you don't dig into the hide until you get it all straightened out like this part. Once you get it straightened out, it's pretty easy. You notice the knife, the way I'm holding the knife, has a tendency to cut into the meat, you know, and if you do, you know, you can always come back a little bit and do that to it. You want to keep that knife pretty much flat with the hide, so it doesn't have a tendency to dig in. And it's good to take little short strokes like this instead of long ones. You can't hardly do it, but this is a kind of delicate part right here. The skin is usually thin there too. I like to use this knife for these tight spots because it's got a short round blade for getting right down in there. I guess you don't have to turn them around, but I turn them around because I like the skin from this one side here. You don't have to be too particular about this nose and the lip part here, because when you stretch it, this all comes off up to the eye. This all gets trimmed off, see, when you're stretching it. To make it nice and round. And you notice the nose there, I just split it right in half because that's all cut off there. You notice how that beaver rolls around and sits right in that V. He'll stay almost anywhere you turn him. Where if you skin him on a flat surface, you would have problems trying to keep him laying on the edge. Some people skin by just pulling the hide and just running the knife along it. I can do that too, but it's not quite as good as leaving your finger under there. Leaves little ridges of fat, see? By having your finger to guide your knife blade, gets it pretty clean. Another important thing too is to make sure that the hide is dry before you start skinning him. Makes it a lot easier. There we are. The hide's off. There's the hide. Okay, now we're going to take the caster out. We want to salvage every sellable part on the beaver, and the caster is pretty valuable. For one thing, it's good out on the trap line for sense, making sense for catching other animals. I guess there's a market in the lower 48 and stuff, and they use it to do a lot of things down there, including perfume. So, you cut it off there. Usually just hang it up on a nail or something, let it dry out a little bit. And there we are. The carcass itself is pretty valuable. Dog mushers like them for dog feed, and they're also good for human consumption. All the beaver trappers that I know love to eat beaver. You get a nice fat one and put him in a roaster with some potatoes and carrots, and just as good as any beef roast. And dog mushers really like them during them long distance races. There's a lot of protein and stuff in the fat and stuff. Yeah. Okay, this is the stretcher. They call them beaver board. And the best there is, I guess, is a piece of 3/4 inch plywood 4 by 4 feet. I did this here just to make it look nice, and it doesn't take up so much room. You take a piece of 3/4 and find the center and put a nail there. You can use a string or a thin piece of wood with little holes in it here, I just stick a nail in there and makes a round circle. I like to make you know, 4 or 5 or 6 different lines here in case you get a small beaver or a big one. You notice here that I guess second to the last line's about the limit. That must be about a 70, 35 inch. That's a 70. They don't get too much bigger than that. So we'll see if we can stretch this guy around as a silver dollar if we can. Then I use these small finishing nails. They don't damage the board, and they also don't make big holes in the hide. So this is what I use. I guess I could point out here that you want to have your nail back from the edge, probably 1/8 of an inch, or a little more. You get them too close and then they tear out. So. We're getting there. This part here is probably the tenderest part in the hide for stretching, so after a little bit I'll put the nails in there and to make sure that's done. Another tender spot is up here. You notice I put those nails, I just put them so they'll stay. I don't drive them in too hard, because if you nail them too deep and then as the hide dry, it'll rip all this out. And with the nail just sitting in there, it'll just bend the nail over. It will just tilt the nail over when it dries, and it doesn't rip up the hide. By nailing it 4 ways to start with, and then keep putting nails in between, and it comes out nice and round. It's pretty hard to just start off on a line because you'll never come out even. It's hard to tell what size a beaver will stretch out to. So I put the nails right in the eye hole here because I can trim this all off, see, right up to the eye. And I put a little nail in this lip here just to hold it out there. Like that. Now, Now I'll get my knife and trim this off here. Now when the fur buyer measures this, even if this nose was on here, was skinned and stretched on here like that, they still measure only from the eye to the tail. So there's no use to leave this part on here. There's the nose. And then I take and trim these off to probably about that much. Yeah, when I get this all stretched, and I'll take a scraper. I'll usually use a knife, but this is too sharp. And then you scrape all this little excess grease off of it here, like that. And you want to put it in a place that ain't too warm, because if it dried too fast, it would dry hard in the thin spots here. And this here would be still kind of raw. So, and if you take it off and finish drying, it would crumble up and it doesn't look nice. It'll shrink to hide up. But if you sit in a cold place probably 2 nights in a day, and you can tell by the nails, they'll start bending over. Or if they're nailed in deep, they'll start ripping along there. And that's when the hide is cured enough to take off. And when I trapped out on a trap line, as soon as they're dried, I took them out, and I had some plywood out there in the cache, and I put them down, one with the hide with the hair down, the other one upside down, skin the hide and with the hair up, and put another piece of plywood on top, and I keep stacking them up until I'm done. And then when I'm done, they're nice and flat. They don't get rolled up, because they have a tendency to, if you just lay them out there somewhere, they'll roll up. But they really look nice when they dry out nice and flat. So this is almost the same size as that beaver. And if you turn it over, this is what it will look like on the hair side.
Well, that completes the fur handling portion of this video. Now I'd like to take a few moments to explain some of the uses of the furs and how fur handling applies to those particular items. During the fleshing and wolf handling portion of our video, we pointed out the technique of how to split the lips and turn the ears and how to flesh around the head and the eyelids. This particular wolf skin came back from the tannery with everything in real fine shape to be used for taxidermy. The lips are nice and soft. They're discolored, but that gets painted in by the taxidermist. All the nose texture is still there. The eyelids are not opened up. They're just exactly perfect for use in taxidermy. The ears appear to be twisted now, but after it's soaked by the taxidermist, it'll be able to be formed into a realistic looking ear for a mount. Above here we have a wolf rug that's been mounted, and this is a good example of what these types of skins are used for and why it's so important to handle them this way. During the Wolverine portion of our fur handling video, we spent a lot of time emphasizing good fleshing. This Wolverine back from the tannery now, you can see there's no hair roots coming through. The dresser was able to buff off the excess, and it produced a very nice, stretchy, soft finish. All the long guard hairs here are still good and tight and intact. This is an excellent Wolverine for use in garment trade, especially for Eskimo people. The feet were also prepared real nice. All the claws are intact, everything. There's no hair slippage around the feet. It was obvious that trapper who did this this pelt did a very, very nice job, knew exactly what he was doing. The Wolverine rug on the floor here obviously was made out of a Wolverine that was handled for taxidermy. There's quite a demand for this use of Wolverine skins and lynx, fox, and wolf. If the trapper didn't prepare the hide properly for taxidermy, a mount like this would be impossible. If a Wolverine skin is prepared for taxidermy by the trapper, there are many markets it can be used for, among which are rugs or life-size mounts, or just a good skin to be bought by somebody just to hang on the wall. Most marten in Alaska are used for the garment trade. This bundle I have in my hand just came back from the tannery, and every one of them tanned out beautifully. The trappers that did these skins really knew their craft. I just wanted to point out the different applications for lynx skins. In my hand here I have a lynx rug, and over here is a nice lynx jacket made out of 8 lynx skins. The point I'm trying to make is that if the trapper handles his lynx for taxidermy, they can be used for both applications, increasing his chance of making a good sale, especially on years when the fur market is low.